Okay, so we've gone to the end of my notes, but I wanted to finish this idea from Genesis because I think it will be nice to end at the beginning. That seems right to me. So we're in chapter 5 of book 2. Book 2 is about discovering the universe, taking your identity into the universe, and seeing what happens. Uh, we just started a Genesis conversation at the end of the last part 5. So here we are about to close out the Genesis discussion and close out the narrative from part 5. Genesis was tough for me, I'll say, as a kid. I found Genesis to be kind of draconian, brutal, tough, harsh, the opposite of the life that I live and the energy that I aspire to. So I appreciated Genesis because it was very black and white, very easy, but I also thought it was tough. And I think it's the best example of conflict between my old paradigm and my new one. So I like ending on Genesis. But Genesis continues. Have you eaten of the tree of which I commanded you not to eat? The man said, the woman whom thou gavest to be with me, she gave me fruit of the tree, and I ate. Then the Lord God said to the woman, what is this you've done? The woman said, the serpent beguiled me, and I ate. You talk about passing the buck. It starts very early. Answer, yes. It has been tough on serpents. The Basari legend continues in the same way. One day the snake said, we too should eat these fruits. Why, why must we go hungry? Antelope said. Why must we go hungry? Antelope said, but we don't know anything about this fruit. Then man and his wife took some of the fruit and ate it. Unumbate came down from the sky and asked who ate the fruit. They answered, we did. Unumbate asked, who told you that you could eat that fruit? They replied, snake did. It's very much the same story. Like, like exactly the same story. Question, what do you make of it that in these two stories the principal actors point to someone else as the initiator of the fall? Answer, yes, but it turns out to be the snake. In both of these stories, the snake is the symbol of life, throwing off the past and continuing to live. Question, why? Answer, the power of life causes the snake to shed its skin just as the moon sheds its shadow. The serpent sheds its skin to be born again, as the moon its shadow to be born again. They are equivalent symbols. Sometimes the serpent is represented as a circle eating its own tail. That's an image of life. Life sheds one generation after another to be born again. The serpent represents immortal energy and consciousness engaged in the field of time, constantly throwing off death and being born again. There is something tremendously terrifying about life when you look at it that way. And so the serpent carries in itself the sense of both the fascination and the terror of life. Furthermore, the serpent represents the primary function of life, mainly eating. Life consists in eating other creatures. You don't think about that very much when you make a nice looking meal, but what you're doing is eating something that was recently alive. And when you look at the beauty of nature and you see the birds picking around, they're eating things. You see cows grazing, they're eating things. The serpent is a traveling alimentary canal. That's about all it is. It gives you that primary sense of shock of life in its most primal quality. There is no arguing with that animal at all. Life lives by killing and eating itself, casting off death and being reborn like the moon. This is one of the mysteries that these symbolic paradoxical forms try to represent. Now, the snake in most cultures is given a positive interpretation. In India, even the most poisonous snake, the cobra, is a sacred animal, and the mythological serpent king is the next thing to the Buddha. The serpent represents the power of life engaged in the field of time and of death, yet eternally alive. The world is but its shadow, its falling skin. The serpent was revered in the American Indians' tradition too. The serpent was thought of as a very important power to be made friends with. Go down to the Pueblos, for example, and watch the snake dance of the Hopi, where they take the snakes in their mouths and make friends with them and then send them back to the hills. The snakes are sent back to carry the human message to the hills, just as they have brought the message of the hills to the humans. The interplay of man and nature is illustrated in this relationship with the serpent. The serpent flows like water, and so is watery, but its tongue continually flashes fire. So you have the pair of opposites together in the serpent. Oh, that's so powerful. Question. In the Christian story, the serpent is the seducer. Answer. That, uh, that amounts to a refusal to affirm life. In the biblical tradition we have inherited, life is corrupt, and every natural impulse is sinful unless it has been circumcised or baptized. The serpent was the one who brought sin into the world, and the woman was the one who handed the apple to man. This identification of the woman with sin, of the serpent with sin, and thus of life with sin, is the twist that has been given to the whole story in the biblical myth and doctrine of the fall. Question. Does the idea of woman as sinner appear in other mythologies? Answer. No. I don't know of it elsewhere. The closest thing to it would be perhaps Pandora with Pandora's box, but that's not sin, that's just trouble. The idea in the biblical tradition of the fall is that nature as we know it is corrupt. Sex in itself is corrupt, and the female, as the epitome of sex, is a corrupter. Why was the knowledge of good and evil forbidden to Adam and Eve? Without that knowledge, we'd all be a bunch of babies still in Eden, without any participation in life. Woman brings life into the world. Eve is the mother of this temporal world. Formerly, you had a dreamlike paradise there in the Garden of Eden. No time, no birth, no death, no life. The serpent who dies and is resurrected, shedding its skin and renewing its life, is the Lord of the central tree, where time and eternity come together. He is the primary God actually in the Garden of Eden. Yahweh, the one who walks there in the cool of the evening, is just a visitor. The garden is the serpent's place. It's an old, old story. We have Sumerian seals from as early as 3500 BC showing the serpent and the tree and the goddess, with the goddess giving the fruit of life to a visiting male. The old mythology of the goddess is right there. Now, I saw a fantastic thing in a movie years ago of a Burmese snake priestess who had to bring rain to her people by climbing up a mountain path, calling a king cobra from its den, and actually kissing him 3 times on the nose. There was the cobra, the giver of life, the giver of rain, as a divine positive figure, not a negative one. Question: but how do you explain the difference between that image and the image of the snake in Genesis? Answer: there is actually a historical explanation based on the coming of the Jews into Canaan and their subjugation of the people of Canaan. The principal divinity of the people of Canaan was the goddess, and associated with the goddess is a serpent. That is the symbol of the mystery of life. The male God oriented group rejected it. In other words, there is a historical rejection of the mother goddess implied in the story of the Garden of Eden. I understand that. It does seem that the story has done women a great disservice by casting Eve as responsible for the fall. But why are women the ones held responsible for the downfall? Answer: they represent life. Man doesn't enter life except by woman. And so it is woman who brings us into this world of pairs, of opposites, and suffering. Question: what is the myth of Adam and Eve trying to tell us about the pairs of opposites? What is the meaning? Answer: it started with the sin, you see. In other words, moving out of the mythological dream time zone of the Garden of Paradise, where there is no time, and where men and women don't even know that they are different from each other. The two are just creatures. God and man are practically the same. God walks in the cool of the evening in the garden where they are, and then they eat the apple, the knowledge of the opposites. And when they discover that they are different, the man and woman cover their shame. You see, they had not thought of themselves as opposites. Male and female is one opposition. Another opposition is the human and God. Good and evil is a third opposition. The primary oppositions are the sexual, and that between human beings and God. Then comes the idea of good and evil in the world. And so Adam and Eve have thrown themselves out of the garden of timeless unity, you might say, just by that act of recognizing duality. They move out into the world. You have to act in terms of pairs of opposites. To move out into the world, you have to act in terms of pairs of opposites. There's a Hindu image that shows a triangle, which is the mother goddess, and a dot in the center of the triangle, which is the energy of the transcendent entering the field of time. And then from this triangle, there comes pairs of triangles in all directions. Out of one comes two. All things in the field of time are pairs of opposites. So this is the shift of consciousness from the consciousness of identity to the consciousness of participation in duality. And then you are into the field of time. Question: is this story trying to tell us that prior to what happened in this garden to destroy us, there was a unity of life? Question: it's a matter of planes of consciousness. It doesn't have to do with anything that happened. There is the plane of consciousness where you can identify yourself with that which transcends pairs of opposites. Question: which is? Answer: unnameable. It is transcendent of all names. Question: God? Answer: God is an ambiguous word in our language, but it appears to refer to something that is known, but the transcendent is unknowable and unknown. God is transcendent, finally, of anything like the name God. God is beyond names and forms. Eckhart said that the ultimate and highest leave taking is leaving God for God, leaving your notion of God for an experience of that which transcends all notions. The mystery of life is beyond all human conception. Everything we know is within the terminology of the concepts of being and not being, many and single, true and untrue. We always think in terms of opposites, but God, the ultimate, is beyond the pairs of opposites. That is all there is to it. Ooh, this sounds like Tantra. Question: why do we think in terms of opposites? Answer: because we can't think otherwise. Question: that's the nature of reality in our time. Answer: that's the nature of our experience of reality. Question: man, woman, life, death, good, evil. Answer: I and you, this and that, true and untrue. Every one of them has an opposite. But mythology suggests that behind that duality, there is a singularity over which this plays like a shadow game. Eternity is in love with the productions of time, says the poet Blake. What does that mean? Answer: the source of temporal life is eternity. Eternity pours itself into the world. It is a basic mythic idea of the God who becomes many in us. In India, the God who lies in me is called the inhabitant of the body. To identify with that divine immortal aspect of yourself is to identify with divinity. Now, eternity is beyond all categories of thought. This is an important point in all of the great Oriental religions. We want to think about God. God is a thought, God is a name, God is an idea. But its reference is to something that transcends all thinking. The ultimate mystery of being is beyond all categories of thought. As Kant said, the thing in itself is no thing. It transcends thingness. It goes past anything that can be thought. The best things can't be told because they transcend thought. The second best are misunderstood because those are the thoughts that are supposed to refer to that which can't be thought about. I know exactly what he's saying. The third best are what we talk about. And myth is that field of reference to what is absolutely transcendent. What can't be known or named except in our feeble attempt to clothe it in language. The ultimate word in our English language for that which is transcendent is God. But then you have a concept, don't you see? You think of God as a father. Now, in religions where the God or creator is the mother, the whole is her body. The whole world is her body. There is nowhere else. The male God is usually somewhere else, but male and female are two aspects of one principle. The division of life into sexes was a late division. Biologically, the amoeba isn't male and female. The early cells are just cells. They divide and become two by asexual reproduction. I don't know at what level sexuality comes in, but it's late. That's why it's absurd to speak of God as of this or that sex. The divine power is antecedent to sexual separation. But isn't the only way a human being can try to grope with this immense idea is to assign it a language that he or she understands? God, he, God, she. Answer: yes, but you don't understand it if you think it's a he or she. The he or she is a springboard to spring you into the transcendent. And transcendent means to transcend, to go past duality. Everything in the field of time and space is dual. The incarnation appears either as male or as female, and each of us is the incarnation of God. You're born into only one aspect of your actual metaphysical duality, you might say. This is represented in the mystery religions, where an individual goes into a series of initiations, opening him out inside into a deeper and deeper depth of himself. And there comes a moment where he realizes that he is both mortal and immortal, both male and female. Do you think there was such a place as the Garden of Eden? Answer: of course not. The Garden of Eden is a metaphor for that innocence that is innocent of time, innocent of opposites. And that is the prime center out of which consciousness then becomes aware of the changes. But if there is in the idea of Eden this innocence, what happens to it? Isn't it shaken or dominated or and corrupted by fear? Question. That's it. There is a wonderful story of the deity, of the self that said, I am. As soon as it said, I am, it was afraid. Why? It was an entity now in time. Then it thought, what shall I be afraid of? I'm the only thing that is. And as soon as it said that, it felt lonesome and wished that there were another. And so it felt desire. It swelled, split into two, became male and female, and begot the world. Fear is the first experience of the fetus in the womb. There's a Czechoslovakian psychiatrist, Stanislav Grof, now living in California, who for years treated people with LSD. And he found that some of them re experienced birth. And in the re experiencing of birth, the first stage is that of the fetus in the womb without any sense of I or being. Then, shortly before birth, the rhythm of the universe begins, and that's terror. Fear is the first thing, the thing that says I. Then comes the horrific stage of getting born, the difficult passage through the birth canal, and then, my God, light. Can you imagine? Isn't it amazing that this repeats just what the myth says? That self said, I am, and immediately felt fear. And then, when it realized it was alone, it felt desire for another and became two. That is the breaking into the world of light and the pairs of opposites. What does it say about what all of us have in common that so many of these stories contain similar elements? The forbidden truth, the forbidden fruit, the woman, for example, these myths, these creation stories contain thou shalt not. Man and woman rebel against that prohibition and move out on their own. After years and years of reading these things, I'm still overwhelmed at the similarities in cultures that are far, far apart. Answer. There's a standard folktale motif called the one forbidden thing. Remember Bluebeard, who says to his wife, don't open that closet. And then one always disobeys. In the Old Testament story, God points out the one forbidden thing. Now, God must have known very well that man was going to eat the forbidden fruit. But it was by doing that that man became the initiator of his own life. Life really began with that act of disobedience. Question: how do you explain these similarities? There are two explanations. One explanation is that the human psyche is essentially the same all over the world. The psyche is the inward experience of the human body, which is essentially the same in all human beings, with the same organs, the same instincts, the same impulses, the same conflicts, the same fears. Out of this common ground have come what Jung has called the archetypes, which are the common ideas of myths. Question: what are archetypes? They are elementary ideas, what could be called ground ideas. These ideas Jung spoke of as archetypes of the unconscious. Archetype is a better term because elementary ideas suggest head work. Archetype of the unconscious means it comes from below. The difference between the Jungian archetypes of the unconscious and Freud's complexes is that the archetypes of the unconscious are manifestations of the organs of the body and their powers. Archetypes are biologically grounded, whereas the Freudian unconscious is a collection of repressed traumatic experiences from the individual's lifetime. The Freudian unconscious is a personal unconscious. It is biographical. The Jungian archetypes of the unconscious are biological. The biographical is secondary to that. All over the world and at different times of human history, these archetypes or elementary ideas have appeared in different costumes. The differences in the costumes are the results of environment and historical conditions. It is these differences that the anthropologist is most concerned to identify and compare. Now, there is also a counter theory of diffusion to account for the similarity of myths. For instance, the art of tilling the soil goes forth from an area in which it was first developed, and along with it goes a mythology that has to do with fertilizing the earth, with planting and bringing up the food plants. Some such myth as that just described of killing a deity, cutting it up, burying its members, and having the food plants grow. Such a myth will accompany an agricultural or planting tradition, but you won't find it in a hunting culture. So there are historical as well as psychological aspects of this problem of the similarity of myths. I think that's stop right there. I feel like I need to say a couple more things. We'll stop.